welcome to Series 2 of the Great British Quilter podcast. I'm Sarah Ashford and I can't wait to share with you my fantastic lineup of guests over the next 8 episodes. I'll be meeting with authors, quilters, shop owners and industry professionals to find out more about them and how they contribute to the world of quilting that we know and love. A huge thank you goes to Aurifil Thread, who have generously sponsored this series and helped make it possible. Aurifil is an Italian thread company specialising in superior quality cotton threads for professional and domestic quilters. With a wide range of threads in varying weights and a beautiful spectrum of colour, quilters can find the perfect thread for their project. Do visit aurifil.com for more information. My second sponsor is Oakshot Fabrics. Oakshot is a family-run business supplying quilters, sewers and textile artists the world over. Renowned for the high quality of its fabrics and the sumptuousness of its colour ranges, the collections are ethically sourced from specialist weavers with the equipment, expertise and capabilities to achieve the standards they require. Each unique colourway marries a base colour warp with a complementary or contrasting weft thread. This produces the trademark shot effect when the colour appears to shimmer and move depending on how the light falls. Only by using the best quality dyes, soft water and computer-controlled dyeing is it possible to produce the superior colour strike and ensure an even application of colour. Oakshot fabrics are incredibly beautiful and a wonderful and luxurious addition to every quilter's stash. To find out more, visit oakshotfabrics.com. Sarah Hibbert is a modern quilter influenced as much by art and architecture as by quilting heritage. Often starting with traditional quilt blocks and giving them an improvisational twist, Sarah's use of textural fabric, hand stitching, natural and rich tones and a clever but limited use of prints has seen her work shown internationally as well as being acquired for both public and private collections. Her Reflections quilt was acquired by the Quilters Guild in 2019 for their permanent collection to represent modern quilting. Her Macaroon quilt has been featured by Festival of Quilts 2020 and 2021 for their poster. Recently, Sarah has challenged herself to create small paper collages within a limited time frame. Selecting from these simple pieces, Sarah scales the design to construct quilts that retain the spontaneity of the originals while showcasing her characteristic quilting style. Sarah will have a solo gallery of her work at the Festival of the Quilts UK in July 2022. I caught up with Sarah on Zoom and I know you're going to love learning more about her and her beautiful work.
Hi, morning Sarah, how are you doing?
Morning. I'm fine, Sarah, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the invite. I really am chuffed that you've asked me. Thank you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure catching up with you. So tell me, how are things for you now that lockdown is lifting and we've got some of our freedoms back?
Lovely. Lovely. I've enjoyed is not the right word, but I've been okay through lockdown. I haven't been too agitated that I can't go out. I've enjoyed using the time in other ways. I enjoy being at home and I enjoy, either working from home or quilting or whatever from home. But the part I've missed the most is actually meeting people face to face, chatting, coffee shops, love coffee shops, eating out for supper. And that's the bit I've really enjoyed. I haven't necessarily missed shops. I have missed very much Ray Stitch in Angel Islington, being able to go through there and feel their beautiful linens. But yes, I feel I've had both vaccines now, so I feel quite safe that I can go out. Still a bit hesitant about leaping across and hugging people, but technically, yes, I am pleased that it's lifted, and I can't wait till we hear about the travel restrictions, what we are allowed to do and what we can't do and whatever. But I'm pleased that we've finally come through it.
I remember positive, doesn't it, compared to say a year ago?
Yes, that's right. I remember my husband said the very first lockdown, and when they talked about that it wouldn't open till Easter, he said, till April, that's ages. What do you think? It's been like a whole year.
Yeah.
but it is what it is, and yeah, I'm pleased that it's now lifting, especially with the sun shining and being.
That's right. We're going into the spring and summer, and vaccinations are going really well, and fingers crossed we're on the right path to coming out of it and being together again, which is really exciting prospect after a year of being at home. So let's talk about your quilts, Sarah. So your work has got a really distinctive style. It's so beautiful. You've got calm hues, really organic style of quilting. It's very distinctive. How did you find your style?
I have been asked that a few times actually, and thank you very much indeed for saying that. I don't think I found it. I think it found me, if you like. I've always loved colour. I grew up in a house full of colour, and I've always, but it's, even though I'm hesitant here, even though I say I love colour, I distinctly don't like some particular colours. Or I love red, but it's got to be the right punchy
shade of red.
Pillar box red. It hasn't got to be a wishy-washy red. And it's things like that. But it's just, I think it found me and the way the fabrics marry against each other. Very much in the early days of my quilting, visiting quilt shops. Admittedly, they were a bit sparse then and nowhere near the choice we have now. But I was attracted to the fact that they used to stack the colours together, like their patterns and whatever. So that sort of started me off on the road of actually putting colours together. I can't sort of take credit for that. But then from there, I think I've built up enough in my stash and enough confidence to put colours together. And then I can step away and say, well, you know what, I think white is too harsh there. I'll just tone it down a bit. But again, I use all the colours to my liking, because every quilt I make for me primarily. And if somebody else likes it and somebody else praises it or whatever, or it gets accepted into an exhibition, then that's a real added bonus. I've never made a quilt to actually submit. I have busted a gut to get a few ready to submit, but they weren't initially made in the beginning to be able to submit to an exhibition.
Oh right, oh that's interesting. So you really do kind of make from the heart, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
And they have such a wonderful reception because they're beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I belong to, well, I started my quilting journey, if you like, back, well, my daughter was born 84, about 86, 87. I went to an evening class at St Albans College run by a lady called Angela Madden, which I really enjoyed. I did a sampler quilt with her. And from there, the other members in the group, in the class, belonged to a local group near me called Pear Tree Quilters. And they very kindly asked me at the end of the term if I would like to join them. They'd been running 2 or 3 years before I joined. And we still meet the 2nd and the 4th Tuesdays of the month, albeit on Zoom now. There was 14 of us. Unfortunately, now there's about 9 of us, I think. But they have encouraged me, as we've encouraged each other, of producing things. We're all completely different. Our styles are completely different. But in the early days, we used to put an exhibition on every year at Potton End, a little village hall in just the other side of Berkhamsted. And that pushed me to actually make things and finish things. So that sort of started me off on quilt shows, if you like. We were very successful. We did it for many, many years. And that was great. We used to have coach loads turn up. We used to do lunch and tea and coffee. And it was a great fun day. Yeah, and then we finished a few years back now because we're heading elderly and a few of the members were elderly and it was a bit too much. But it was great fun. that sort of.
And you've had a lot of quilts in shows since then, and we're going to talk about that a bit later on.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk a bit more about your background, and you come from a very creative family, don't you? Your father was a graphic designer, so you were surrounded by creativity.
Thank you. Yes, I was. Yes, I was very lucky. My father was a self-taught graphic designer, started off as a printer and grew from there into the country, or North Wales, then moved down, eventually moved to St Albans, where I was born. I've got two quite a bit older brothers, so I was number 3. My father's design practice was pretty much established, or beginning to be established, by the time I was sort of school age or whatever. My brothers were off at college and uni and, you know, setting on their own career path. So I was the one that was always dragged round to art galleries, whether I liked it or not. And into, you know, bookshops. I remember going to an amazing bookshop which is off Jermyn Street, Thomas Hennage, and it's one of those bookshops that you have to climb in through the door, climb over the piles of books, and I just got sat on a chair and had to wait hours until my father had decided which books he was going to buy and then cart out. But that sort of started my love of books, and I'm forever, you know, I bought the Marimekko book yesterday, and that's just amazing. So that started my love of books and art galleries. I wanted to go to art college, but it was at the time when, I don't know, my father was a bit concerned about, you know, whether what I wanted to do was fabric design and play with fabric and textiles, but there was courses on it, but it wasn't so sort of obvious as it is today, what the end result would be. So consequently, I didn't quite know what I was going to do with it. Was I just going to play for a further year at cutting and sticking and playing? So my father sort of, you know, we talked about it, and in the end I went off to secretarial college, which I'm really glad I did, because it gave me a good grounding, gave me a year to grow up after school. And then I went into catering, and I ended up working at the Savoy, helping run the small private banqueting rooms, which was great fun. I loved it. Eventually, when I got married, my husband used to have to drive up and literally drag me out in the evening after a long day, and it was such a buzz. I absolutely loved the whole, I don't know, theatre of hotels and who you meet and the customers, and you know, that can be a whole different story altogether, that particular career. So I played around with stitch. I did odd little bits of embroidery, I did a lot of cross stitch. I did, you know, with wool, but I didn't really pick up a needle and thread until I went to Angela's evening class. My mother wasn't a sewer, and my grandmother wasn't a sewer. She lived with us till I was 10 and passed away. So I didn't really get into quilting till I sort of got married, if you like, and did it from there. I've always enjoyed textiles, enjoyed print and clothes. I wanted to be the next Sandra Rhodes, painting on silk. I thought that was really romantic with her bright pink hair. But no, I never took it on as a career as such.
I think a lot of people come to quilting later on, quite often when they have babies and they want to make things for their children, and like you say, it can be quite difficult and perhaps not what would be expected to go into textiles. I don't know, sometimes there's, you know, like you say, there isn't necessarily it's not like training to become a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer necessarily, and so the same with me. I kind of fell into it, and now, you know, there's so much to do and so many people to meet and so much potential for creativity. It's amazing. So let's talk about how you sort of compose your quilts, because they do have this fantastic distinctive style. I read an interview with you in today's Quilter magazine saying that you talk to your fabrics.
Yes, I
really
do.
like that.
Yes, I do. I think that was the first time I sort of actually said it out loud, if you like. I have this horrible fear that people out there have this vision of me being a bag lady wandering up and down the street talking to fabric. But I do mutter a lot to my fabric. Obviously, maybe not out loud, but I do. And like, I have a particular quilt which I've been quilting for many years now, which is my Gunter Stoltz quilt. Gunter Stoltz was a textile weaver in Bauhaus, and she did beautiful designs which you can easily replicate or take inspiration from into fabric. And I did that, and that's the piece I started, must be 8, 9, 10 years ago now. Still haven't finished quilting it. Sits on the side of my sofa, as does a blue silk quilt, which I'm constantly quilting.
And when you say quilting, you mean hand quilting, don't you?
Yes, hand quilting. Sorry,
quilting,
yeah,
which is why it's taken so long.
Yeah, and also it's taken long because I don't necessarily want to finish them.
No.
The Gunter quilt, I chat to her as a person because I think she's in part of the stitches. And whether she would like it or she wouldn't like it, or this and that, and and I mull over problems a lot when I'm quilting. I have a very hectic work life because of I do bookkeeping and payroll, so my days are very geared to time frames that you have to get the VAT return in on time, you have to get the payroll in on time, etc., etc. So when I get overloaded in my brain, if you like, which happens more than it used to, I find taking an hour out or half an hour out, just sitting on the sofa and with a needle and thread in my hand, I can sort my problems out and sort what I want to do. Like, even, well, I really want to visit that and I want to see that exhibition. Oh, that would be nice. And that's, I don't necessarily talk to the fabric as such, but I talk in my head and it just calms me down and just gives me the space to clear my head of thoughts.
Yes.
And put nice thoughts back in instead of VAT returns. So, yeah.
And that could be the beauty of quilting, because for that quilt that you're working on for 10 years, there is no rush, there is no deadline. You don't have to finish it by a certain date. It's just about enjoying the process and being mindful, and, like you say, sort of offloading in your mind all the things that you know have had to deal with through that day, and just enjoying the process, which is really lovely, isn't it?
And also, when you look back on the stitches, especially with my blue quilt, because I'm quilting it all, it was a Heidi Stoltz Weber piece of fabric which I bought at Festival of Quilts many years ago now. I was saved up. I kept going back, and it's very expensive, well, compared to the fabrics I bought at that time. I kept going back and stroking it. It's sort of indigo blue, which is my favorite color. I kept going back and stroking it. I thought, you know what, let's buy it. And the quilt is just made up of squares of that blue, but it's so fine, the fabric, that I quilt it in silk, and it's from the hand weavers studio in London. And because the stitches, being in silk, are so tiny, it is going to take me years, but it's so nice looking back on it. I know exactly what I was doing when I particularly quilted that part. And I look back on Gunter, and there's 2 squares that I really don't like. I completed them with crosses, and they shout at me. I don't like them, but I'm not going to take those stitches out, because obviously I thought they were good at the time. I
was going to ask you that. How do you feel about that? So you are just going to leave them there? Yeah. Because at the time, like you say, it felt right at that time, and now time's moved on, and you'll do something different.
That's right. It's part of the quilt story. And its journey with me to the end result, really.
Yes. So you use a lot of linen in your quilts, which is beautiful, and it's a little bit different in that it behaves differently, doesn't it, to quilts?
Very much so.
Yes. So what draws you to the linen? How do you find it to work with?
I've got used to it a lot now. Admittedly, the points when you're doing like a star block or something like that, you have to be careful with because of fraying.
Mhm.
The reason I fell in love with particular colours of linen I'd seen in a shop. So I bought that because of the colour, and I loved the texture of it. And I love some of the big Japanese prints that you get, like Coca, or there's various ones out there. I've used them quite a lot, a big red fabric with a big sort of white blob in them and things. So I love those. So I bought a whole range, and I put together, or started to put together, a quilt with using this fabric with ordinary Kona cotton. I always use Kona cotton.
Yeah.
And it just shouted. The texture shouted it. It looked like the linen was sitting on top of it instead of being incorporated in it. So I discarded those blocks and took them apart. And I went on to, Robert Kaufman, or, whoever, various fabric shop. And I just started buying Robert Kaufman Essex linen.
Yeah.
It has got cotton in it, so it does behave better than 100% linen. So I just switched to that, really. And once I'd made 2 or 3, I just love the texture. I'm not too worried, because again, quilts are for me. I'm going around quilt shops, or quilt shows, sorry. I do envy beautiful quilts that are so crisp and so precise, and so they just take your breath away. But I just love the warmth of the linen, and it's puckered a little bit because of the weave, or it's just got a bit more voice to it, to me, than a flat piece of cotton.
And that's very much your style, isn't it? This organic, where things aren't necessarily perfect, and you've got the hand quilting on the top, and it really works, and it's beautiful. And if you go back to quilts made 100 years ago, when they didn't have rotary cutters and rulers, they weren't perfect, but we still consider them to be beautiful. And it's only when you get close up and you go, oh, that point doesn't match very well, and all those hand quilting stitches aren't very even. But it doesn't matter, because I think you're looking at the quilts as a whole piece, rather than focusing in. That's not what quilts are about, really. So
very much so.
Yes. So going back to the hand quilting then, so was that something that you developed over time, that you kind of discovered that you loved? Do you do machine quilting as well?
I do machine quilting. I've got just a small Bernina, lives on my kitchen table, and I don't have the luxury of a quilt studio or quilt office, unfortunately, so it all lives on the dining room table. So therefore my quilts never extend larger than sort of 40 or 50 inches square. I always work square. Again, it's just visually, I prefer squares, and that's all I can get through my sewing machine. I do straight line quilting, or I'll do a curve and then just follow it with the edge of my quilting foot.
Yes.
I'm amazed at how many people can do the incredible designs, and the likes of Jackie Gearing, and originally Angela Madden. She does the most beautiful quilting on machine. I can't do that. If I'm doing free motion, I start doing it, and then I think, what's for supper? And I wonder what's on television tonight. And I go veering off. My concentration level is hopeless. So I can do straight lines, and that's about it. And I do it to finish a quilt, maybe. But I much prefer hand quilting. I love sitting. I quilt with a hoop on some quilts. A quilt I'm making at the moment, which is half rectangles. That's a large piece. It's 60 inches square, and I'm hand quilting it, which I'll come back to in a minute. But with that one, I haven't got it in a hoop, purely because I'm going to be forever moving the hoop along to do the next bit. So I curl myself up on the sofa in the most non-organic way. I'll probably get told off for damaging my back or my limbs or something if somebody actually saw the contortions I get into. And I get underneath the quilt and I wrap myself up in it, and I quilt that area, which I love doing. But with that particular quilt, because it's got so many colours, it's got 16 different quilt colour, 16 different colours in it, I've chosen about 20 quilt threads, different quilt threads. I pull a piece off that's the length of my arm. I quilt with that. Once that quilting is finished, albeit at a seam or halfway through a block, I just pick up another colour and I start again. So it's not necessarily variegated, but it's chunks of different colour. Like there's a chunk of red, and then there's a chunk of white and a chunk of blue. And I've never done that before. I've quilted just all in the same colour or a variegated thread. So it's a nice different vibe to get. So
it's funny you should say that, actually, because I'm quilting a big quilt at the moment and I'm doing exactly the same thing.
Oh, right.
I'm using my thread collection, the Great British Quilter one, and I've just been doing the same thing, just putting my hand in the bag, pulling out a colour, stitching with that, and then doing the next one. And as long as that you don't pull out the same one twice, I'm just going with it. And it's such a colourful quilt anyway, and it just really works, doesn't it? And I had never really worked in that way. I'd kind of tend to stick to one colour, and then I just thought, well, why not, you know?
It's lovely. It's lovely because there's so many beautiful threads around at the moment, and I'm using an organic thread, organic cotton thread, which is just lovely to use.
I was going to ask you, what threads do you use?
I flip between the two. For machine quilting and piecing, definitely Orifil. Always go with Orifil. I don't necessarily hand quilt with Orifil. I have used the heavier weights occasionally, but I haven't got a big enough stash. The quilt, this one is Stoff, which is a German make of thread. I think it's German, organic thread, which I actually picked up in Germany, and I have picked up at Ray Stitch as well. For my hand quilting, I use a lot of hand-dyed threads from various places. Normally I stock up at either the Knitting and Stitching Show or Festival of Quilts. I very rarely buy online. I don't buy online because I like to see what the colour chunks you get, especially with some of the hand-dyed.
And hopefully we can stock up on our threads this year, won't that be cool?
Yeah, very much so, very much so.
So as well as your quilting, you also make beautiful paper collages, don't you? And so I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that. I know that you've been doing those as part of the 100-day project. And do your collages ever inspire your quilts?
Yes, they do, very much so. Thank you. Yes, I've always played with paper and collected paper ever since being, a child, really, with, your scrapbooks. I was great into, scrapbooks and cutting out things on magazines and all sorts of things. So I've always kept that, and I've always kept, even not necessarily the last sort of 6 or 7 years I've been doing collages properly, more regularly. I've still got boxes that I cut out of scraps that I cut out sort of 10, 15 years ago. So I've never really done anything with them, but the idea was planted by my good friend Kristen from New York, from Brooklyn Haberdashery. I was chatting to her one year. I met her at Quiltcon. I'd met her on Instagram, if you like, and excuse me, met up with her at the very first Quiltcon, which was lovely to actually meet in person. But we were talking about the 100-day project. I'd never heard of it, and she had been doing it a couple of years with her beautiful stitch work. And she said, why don't you jump in and do it? It's a great thing to do, and a good community to become part of, because the 100-day project, you could write a poem for 100 days, you can draw a picture, you can bake a cake, you can make a jumper, it's not just it's just not allied to craft, if you like. Anyway, I jokingly said to her, well, I don't have time to stitch every day. I would never be able to achieve that. But it planted the seeds, and I was thinking about it. So I thought, you know what, I'll do a paper collage each day. So I set my timer, got out my boxes, got my Pritt stick, got some cards, cut all my cards. I cut about 20 cards in readiness. and I set my timer as such in my head for 15 minutes. Excuse me. And I did a collage in 15 minutes. Some only took a couple of minutes, some took the whole time. And when they were finished, they were finished. I didn't worry about it. I didn't go back and think, oh, I don't like that one. I just put it on the wall, took a photograph and posted it onto Instagram. So that started me off. And from that first 100, I kept out half a dozen, if you like, thinking, yeah, I'd really like to make that in fabric. I really would. And the first one I put together from that fabric was the Macaroon Quilt, which is the quilt they're using for the Festival of Quilts poster.
Yes, they are.
They used it last year, and unfortunately that didn't go ahead. So they're using it. They asked if they could use it again this year, which I'm thrilled with. But I made that all in calico to begin with, not the dark colour, and I really didn't like it. The calico represented my card better,
right?
But I didn't like it, so I redid it in charcoal, and that is not in linen. It's in Kona cotton and Alison glass fabric. Now, the first year at Quiltcon, I had met an amazing quilter and an amazing quilter called Kathleen, and she had a quilt beautifully quilted simply by a lady called Christine, who's in Denver. And I contacted her with my Macaroon quilt because I knew I wanted really abstract quilting on it as opposed to my straight line, just to bring it a bit more punchy. So I contacted her, posted it off to Denver, and she quilted it for me. So from that, I've now made about a dozen quilts inspired from my collages, and that path is definitely going ahead. I've got other ones in the pipeline, which I haven't shown yet. And if nothing else, it's a great learning curve, because at the end of my 100 days, and I've done it, this is the 5th year I've done it now. At the end of the 100 days, I pull out the ones I really like, and set about making quilts from them. And I don't ever put them back and think, well, I'm not going to make that one because it's too tricky. I just scratch my head and think, right, how can I make it? How can I recreate that from an 8-inch square or even a postcard right up to a 40-inch quilt? So it's helped me greatly with pattern making. Which,
yes, I'm sure. What a fantastic process! I love it. It's brilliant because it goes from very simple, it's like what a child does, isn't it? Gluing, sticking with shapes and colour, and then it transforms into a fantastic quilt, and then you're collaborating with people on the other side of the world. It's just amazing.
She's quilted three for me now, and then the other ones, like so far, well, fingers crossed, each quilt I've made in that way from a collage, each quilt has been accepted into Quiltcon.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. I just wanted you to share with the listeners, you've got a separate Instagram, haven't you, for your collages?
Yes, I have. I set up a separate one mainly because it was interrupting the page with quilting, and also again it was a whole chunk of 100 days. So it's Cornerstone Collages.
And your quilt is Quilt's cornerstone is your quilts.
Yes, I've always loved the word cornerstone. To me, and I love seeing buildings that's got a cornerstone, and especially if they're labelled that cornerstone was laid by the architect or laid by the builder, and you go into Spitalfields and you see some beautiful buildings, and I just love that word cornerstone, and I just feel as though it's a foundation to start something from. So that's where I shouldn't say this as a Hibbert, but I'm not that keen on the name Hibbert. So sorry to my husband and my family and my parents-in-law, but so I didn't necessarily want to be Sarah Hibbert Quilts, so that's why I chose that, and then I wanted to move it on to the collage. Yeah.
And with the 100-day project, I've read a lot about it and seen lots of fantastic 100-day projects. How does it work? Do people have to start on a certain day, or can you just pick it up any time of the year and start counting your 100 days?
It starts on a certain day. It started, I think about 7 years ago, I think, by two ladies in, don't necessarily quote me, and I know this is going out, so I apologize to them, but I think they're in the San Francisco area, I think, or California. They started it, and so it started always in April. This year they moved it forward. Well, one lady's dropped away and she's doing something else now. She's doing writing, and the other lady has continued it on, and because of lockdown, and so she moved it forward to start in January this year.
Okay.
But it's always in April. You don't have to subscribe. You can just start. If you just go on to the Instagram 100-day project or the hashtag 100-day project, you can find out more about it. You can subscribe if you want to, because they do mentoring that they will send you out emails. They'll send you out emails of how you're getting on. I do subscribe to their newsletter, which is very informative. But they can help you on your way, which helps greatly if you want to take it further with maybe writing or pattern making or whatever, into a more creative field. So they're very inspirational. My husband retired last April, and one thing we've always done together, we love walking, especially in cities. We love city visiting. We've always taken pictures of numbers, of house numbers, graffiti numbers, all sorts of, various things, on coffee cups. And I sort of gave up after a while because, but my husband's always continued that on. So I mentioned to him when I started my 100-day project this year, because I've run two, one on my quilting of half square triangles and one on my collage. Why doesn't he do one with his numbers? Because he does have an Instagram account, which is 1 to 100. So 1 and then 08, 100, 58. And he's been putting up a different number. So he's put number 1, number 2, number 3, and he's done a story behind them. Either it relates to where the photograph has been taken, or maybe the year, what happened in that year. And it's been great. So you can do it in all sorts of different ways. I'm really proud of him that he's been doing that. So.
That's so interesting. I did not know that he had been doing that. And I love the creativity and the ideas that people come up with for their 100 days.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of having a mentor if you feel you need one, because 100 days is quite a long time, isn't it? And a lot of people kind of embark on these things sort of all gung-ho, and then it's hard to maintain that momentum.
Yeah, very much so. With my collage, I'm fine. I do it every morning, just fall out of bed, put it together, and it's done. But with the half square triangles, I only post every 10 days because I think, well, nobody wants to see one half square triangle every day. So
tell me, what are you doing for your half square triangle 100 days? You're making one a day?
Yes, or maybe cheating and doing a couple a day. But I have, as you can appreciate, all my offcuts. I don't ever throw fabric away. I have two big calico bags with all my offcuts of colours. So I put my hand down the side of the bag, pull out 2 pieces of fabric, regardless whether they go together, make up a half square triangle and chuck it in a box.
Yeah.
And and then at the end of that 10 days, I'll sew that strip together. I put it together to the existing strips of 10. So obviously this week I will be putting it together to my previous 9 rows. And the only stipulation I have is when I put the row together, as long as there's not 2 of the same colour sit together, if that's the case, then I flip it. I flip the row upside down and I sew it together. And there's no rhyme or reason. I just pull out the colours that I like, and it's amazing what comes out. It can be a really sparkly pink down to a really muted, dull mushroom colour. And it's, I've really enjoyed doing that. And I think, yeah, I think I'm definitely going to do more of just close your eyes and put your hand in type
I
of
really
quilt.
like that idea. And
Yeah.
it goes back to something that's being talked about a lot at the moment, which is sustainability and using what you've got. And I'm making a scrap quilt at the moment, and I was the same. I was thinking, oh, I want to make this quilt, going to get some new fabric. Why do I need more fabric? I've got a room full of fabric. Let's use what I've got and just put it all together, and it works, and it's fantastic. So yeah, I definitely think that that's something everyone should have a go at, using up the scraps and using what they've got. It's good fun as well, and surprising, you know, like you say, it could be fabrics that you would never dream of putting together normally, but actually it works. So
and I think somehow if that fabric has found its way into your fabric stash, whether it be a print, whether it be, you know, anything really, you're gonna like it because you've bought it, you've chosen it. You know, how many people go to a fabric shop and buy yucky fabric? Nobody does that.
No.
You know, that yucky fabric is somebody else's passion. So whatever you choose in your stash and your scrap quilts, it works, it goes together, you know, just lighten up, enjoy it.
And that's it. I think it's about having fun, isn't it, as well, and not getting too bogged down and too serious about these things. You know, it's just fabric at the end of the day. It's, you know, it's meant to be fun and playful. You know, we're creatives, we're playing creatively. So
I've never made an award-winning quilt, and I've never strived to make one. I'm just pleased that people like my work, and yeah, it's fun and it's for me, and you know, it's a bonus if other people like it. So that's great.
And they certainly do, and that brings me on nicely actually to Quiltcon. So for listeners who don't know, Quiltcon is hosted by the Modern Quilt Guild in America. It's a show run every year, usually in a different state. It's been going, I'm not sure how many years now, maybe eight.
It's been going 10, but I don't think the
shows were a bit later, weren't they?
Yes, I think I missed 2, and then I went to the third.
So your first one, you went to Savannah, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I joined, I think, about a year after they started, and obviously used to get their newsletter and various emails, and then obviously they had their exhibition, and I bought the magazine for the first year, and I bought the magazine for the second year, and I was flicking through it, and it just blew me away. You just hadn't, you know, I know we're very, very active here, and you know, I love going to Festival of Quilts and going to Malvern, and I belong to London Quilters. We have a biannual exhibition in Swiss Cottage, which I love being part of. But there was something that really sung out of those pages of the Quiltcon magazine. And I turned to my husband, I said, oh, you know, I really, really would love to do this. I'd love to go. And and he said, well, yeah, why don't you? Where is the next one? I said, Savannah. And he said, well, I don't really fancy Savannah. Quick as a whip, I said, I really wasn't planning on you coming. I wanted to go on my own. I've never travelled on my own as such. I have obviously gone over, my best friend lives in Amsterdam, and I had a good friend that lived in Vienna. So I'm used to sort of travelling on the plane on my own, but never on a two-week stint or a week stint. And we sort of giggled about that. And he said, yeah, go for it. So jumped straight on, booked my ticket, booked my attendance, and had to obviously wait till the following February. I was in the process of making a scrap quilt at the time, or an improv quilt called Serendipity. And that was made by it was linen, and it was a lot of hand printed pieces, a lot by Colette Moscrop, which she lives in London, an amazing fabric printer, and also Lou Summers and Karen Lewis, as well, you know. And I had lots of their fabrics, but what I did was I cut them up into various sizes, and I put them through my sewing machine, the other side of my sewing machine, and I pulled out pieces. And if they went together size-wise, they got sewn together, pressed and pushed back. And then again, if they got pulled through, they got added to, and that grew into a piece 40 inches square. So I actually took a flyer and submitted that as a quilt to Quiltcon. I didn't know what to expect. It was accepted. I was chuffed a bit.
Because that's the difference, isn't it, with the Modern Quilt Guild compared to the Festival of Quilts? It's a juried quilt show.
Yes, it's a juried quilt show. That's right.
So to be accepted to Quiltcon, it's a real honour, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So that was accepted. I met up with a good friend from Chicago. She travelled with me as well after we chatted, and she tagged along, which was great. And we walked into Quiltcon on the very first day. And as you do, you go marching off to find your quilt, to see how it's hung and whatever. And yeah, I was pleased with it. It was great. And then I turned round and I saw the Lincoln quilt, which is by Kim Soper. Holy moly, it was breathtaking. It was just out of this world. And in fact, that quilt was chosen as viewer's choice.
Oh, yeah.
And I still tease her to this day. She's become a good friend, and I meet up with her at Quiltcon each year. My quilt had just as much footfall going past it. The only trouble is people were looking at hers and weren't looking at mine. So I'll forgive her. I will forgive her. But Quiltcon gave me the confidence to bounce up to some of the American quilters and, a Swiss quilter, Sophie, and just to say how much I enjoy their work and what an inspiration it was. And it's just such a different vibe, I think.
Yes.
So I've gone every year since then. And year 2, I had 2 pieces accepted, and year 3, very luckily, that was Pasadena. I had 5 pieces accepted, which totally blew me away. So very lucky.
Pasadena is where we first met, I think.
Yes, we did. We did
there because there weren't many Brits at the Pasadena show.
No.
And so we all managed to somehow find each other, which was lovely. And I was lucky. I did have a quilt in the show that year too.
Yes, you did. It was lovely.
So it was really nice that the British quilters were represented in some small way. And I think as the years have gone on, more and more British quilters are putting their quilts in and getting involved with the Modern Quilt Guild. And there's more of us going to Quiltcon. And it's like you say, it's a very different vibe to the Festival of Quilts. And I love them both equally, but it's always such fun and such an adventure to be over there. And the quilts are just so inspiring. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it concentrates your mind more than festival. For a long time with festival quilts, I've only ever gone for the day, whereas the last couple of years I've gone for 2 days and stayed over. Because there is so much to see. Whereas at Quiltcon, they've only got maybe 300 or 400 quilts. It concentrates, and also because you've travelled that far and you're staying there, you can go back and re-look at that particular aisle. So it does concentrate your mind. And also the stall holders, the very first one I went to, Savannah, had very few stall holders. And if they did, it was like the Orifil, they weren't selling their thread, it was just presentation. But the stall holders at Quiltcon are now very much geared for the modern market as well. So you get that added bonus that if you want to get started with modern colours or modern vibe, it's sort of all there on the plate for you to help yourself. Like a huge buffet. So
and I love the way that because you're right, it's a much smaller show, and that was one thing that struck me when I went to that first show at Pasadena, how small it was actually. But then it does give you that opportunity to really soak it up and enjoy it. And like you say, we were there for multiple days, so you could go back and revisit. And like you say, all the stall holders were selling all the goodies for you to go on your modern quilting journey. So yeah, it's fantastic.
And I think a good majority of the quilts at Quiltcon, and this may come across a bit negative, but it's not, are made by well-known quilters that you see in the magazines, you buy their books or whatever, or you hear their podcasts, or you follow them on Instagram. But it's variable. They're everybody approachable, whatever their level of quilt journey. Everybody's so friendly there. Whereas I feel with festival, it's more Joe Public that you're going around. You don't, it's great for them as well, but it's you don't necessarily bounce up to quilters and say you love their quilt, because a lot of the quilts are anonymous. Yes. Because you're looking in a catalogue, and it's, but saying that on the flip side, I think the great thing about Festival of Quilts is that anybody can submit a quilt and it can be shown.
Yes.
And it's a great buzz, whatever level of quilter you are, whether it's your first quilt or your last quilt or one in between, it's still a great buzz to have your piece hung. And there's nothing to be taken away from that. I think it's great.
Yeah.
But I think it's more, the quilters are more anonymous over here for festival, because you don't necessarily recognise that person unless they're standing next to the quilt that they make.
Yes. Yeah. No, they're both fantastic shows for very different reasons, I think. So I think we're coming to the end of our chat, but before we finish, I always like to end with a couple of top tips, and I know you've got some tips to share. So go ahead. What can you share with us? Okay, it's a bit like Desert Island Discs, isn't it? Can I choose an extra one, which is a quote? But the first tip I would say is very much going back to my half square triangles, really. Every time you've finished a quilt, or you're in the process of making a quilt, cut off a 3 or 4 inch square left from your scraps, or even 2 inch square or whatever, put them together and make a couple of half square triangles, put them in a box, and then after a while it's surprising how big that box will grow. And then you've got enough. So if you do it as you go along, it's not an arduous task of thinking, right, I'm going to make a scrap quilt. And so if you just, which is what I do now anyway. The other thing is, with my hand quilting, I've only been doing it the last 2 or 3 years really, is coating my thread with beeswax. Oh yes. And I always used to think it was a faff, to be honest. I used to think, oh well, that adds to an extra bit of malarkey to do. So, but now I always have a big chunk of beeswax sitting next to my threads, and I just run it through over the top of the beeswax block before I start quilting, and it really does help with the tangles and the knots and tugging it through, especially with linen, because sometimes it can be, when you're going over a seam or a join, it gets a little bit angry to pull through. So beeswax. Wow. And then lastly, I would say never quit, be yourself, and don't put too much flour in your brownies. And that quote comes from Catherine Hepburn, my all-time hero. She I love I've got various books on Catherine Hepburn. Her outlook on life, and if you make something or do something like acting and you like it, at least you pleased one person. Yeah. So that's very much my end thought. Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a joy and a pleasure to chat to you this morning.
Well, thank you.
I really hope that we can see each other in person later in the year at festival.
Very much so, very much so. Thank you, Sarah. I've really enjoyed it. Always enjoy your company. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to waffle on a bit. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to my sponsors, Orifil Thread and Oakshot Fabrics, for helping make this podcast possible. Do follow us on Instagram at Great British Quilter and join our private Great British Quilter Facebook group. You can also find out more at greatbritishquilter.com.